in a very direct personal manner even before he became Prime Minister. I must recall the words which he used in the debate of the 8th of March 1934, nearly 3 years ago. In answer to an appeal which I made to him both publicly and privately, he said, "Any government of this country, a national government more than any, and this government, will see to it that in air strength and air power this country shall no longer be in a position inferior to any country within striking distance of our shores." Well, sir, I accepted that solemn promise. But some of my friends, like Sir Edward Grigg and Captain Guest, wanted what the Minister for the Co-ordination of Defence, in another state of being, would have called "further and better particulars," and they raised a debate after dinner, when the Prime Minister, then Lord President, came down to the House and really showed less than his usual urbanity in chiding those members for even venturing to doubt the intention of the Government to make good in every respect the pledge which he had so solemnly given in the afternoon. I do not think that responsibility was ever more directly assumed in a more personal manner. The Prime Minister was not successful in discharging that task, and he admitted with manly candour a year later that he had been led into error upon the important question of the relative strength of the British and German air power. No doubt, as a whole, His Majesty's Government were very slow in accepting the unwelcome fact of German rearmament. They still clung to the policy of one-sided disarmament. It was one of those experiments, we are told, which had to be, to use a vulgarism, tried out, just as the experiments of non-military sanctions against Italy had to be tried out. Both experiments have now been tried out, and ministers are accustomed to plume themselves upon the very clear results of those experiments. They are held to prove conclusively that the policies subjected to the experiments were all wrong, utterly foolish, and should never be used again. And the very same men who were foremost in urging those experiments are now foremost in proclaiming and denouncing the fallacies upon which they were based. They have bought their knowledge, they have bought it dear, they have bought it at our expense, but at any rate let us be duly thankful that they now at last possess it. In July 1935, before the general election, there was a very strong movement in this House in favour of the appointment of a minister to concert the action of the three fighting services. Moreover, at that time the departments of State were all engaged in drawing up the large schemes of rearmament in all branches which have been laid before us in the White Paper, and upon which we are now engaged. One would have thought that that was the time when this new minister, or co-ordinator, was most necessary. He was not, however, in fact appointed until nearly 9 months later, in March 1936. No explanation has yet been given to us why these 9 months were wasted before the taking of what is now an admittedly necessary measure. The Prime Minister dilated the other night, no doubt very properly, the great advantages which had flowed from the appointment of the Minister for the Co-ordination of Defence. Every argument used to show how useful has been the work which he has done accuses the failure to appoint him 9 months earlier, when inestimable benefits would have accrued to us by the saving of this long period. When at last, in March, after all the delays, the Prime Minister eventually made the appointment, the arrangement of duties was so ill-conceived that no man could possibly discharge them with efficiency, or even make a speech about them without embarrassment. I have repeatedly pointed out the obvious mistake in organisation of jumbling together, and practically everyone in the House is agreed upon this, the functions of defence with those of a Minister of Supply. The proper organisation, let me repeat, is 4 departments: the Navy, the Army, the Air, and the Ministry of Supply, with the Minister for the Coordination of Defence over the four exercising a general supervision, concerting their actions, and assigning the high priorities of manufacture in relation to some comprehensive strategic conception. The House is familiar with the many requests and arguments which have been made to the Government to create a Ministry of Supply. These arguments have received powerful reinforcement from another angle in the report The Royal Commission on Arms Manufacture. The first work of this new Parliament, and the first work of the Minister for the Coordination of Defence, if he had known as much about the subject when he was appointed as he does now, would have been to set up a Ministry of Supply, which should, step by step, have taken over the whole business of the design and manufacture of all the supplies needed by the Air Force and the Army, and everything needed for the Navy, except warships, heavy ordnance, torpedoes, and one or two ancillaries. All the best of the industries of Britain should have been surveyed from a general integral standpoint, and all existing resources utilised so far as was necessary to execute the programme. The Minister for the Coordination of Defence has argued as usual against a Ministry of Supply. The arguments which he used were weighty and even ponderous. It would disturb and delay existing programmes. It would do more harm than good. It would upset the life and industry of the country. It would destroy the export trade and demoralise finance at the moment when it was most needed. It would turn this country into one vast munitions camp. Certainly these are massive arguments, if they are true. One would have thought that they would carry conviction to any man who accepted them. But then my right honourable friend went on somewhat surprisingly to say, the decision is not final. It would be reviewed again in a few weeks. What will you know in a few weeks about this matter that you do not know now, that you ought not to have known a year ago, and have not been told any time in the last 6 months? What is going to happen in the next few weeks which will invalidate all these magnificent arguments by which you have been overwhelmed, and suddenly make it worth your while to paralyse the export trade, to destroy the finances, and to turn the country into a great munitions camp? The First Lord of the Admiralty, in his speech the other night, went even farther. He said, "We are always reviewing the position. Everything," he assured us, "is entirely fluid." I am sure that is true. Any one can see what the position is. The Government simply cannot make up their minds. Or they cannot get the Prime Minister to make up his mind. So they go on in strange paradox, decided only to be undecided, resolved to be irresolute, adamant for drift, solid for fluidity, all-powerful to be impotent. So we go on preparing more months and years, precious, perhaps vital to the greatness of Britain, for the locusts to eat. They will say to me, "A Minister of Supply is not necessary, for all is going well." I deny it. The position is satisfactory. It is not true. All is proceeding according to plan. We know what that means. Let me come to the Territorial Army. In March of this year, I stigmatised a sentence in the War Office memorandum about the Territorial Army, in which it was said the equipment of the Territorials could not be undertaken until that of the regular army had been completed. What has been done about all that? It is certain the evils are not yet removed. I agree wholeheartedly with all that was said by Lord Winterton the other day about the army and the territorial force. When I think how these young men who join the Territorials come forward, almost alone in the population, and take on a liability to serve anywhere in any part of the world, not even with a guarantee to serve in their